Hello everyone, and welcome to Lavender and Sage. My name is Abigail, and I use she, her pronouns. In this episode, I would like to talk to y'all about LGBTQ+ representation in Heartstopper. For those of you who don't know, Heartstopper is a TV show based off of a series of graphic novels, and it was released on Netflix a few weeks ago. The show follows the relationship of Charlie and Nick and their lives and the lives of their friends. It's not just about romance, but also self-discovery, acceptance, and friendship. In terms of LGBTQ+ representation, this is probably the most diverse show I've ever seen. There are gay, bi, lesbian, and transgender characters that all have their own complex and well-structured storylines. Since there is so much going on, I'm only going to focus on the parts that are relatable to me, specifically the bisexual representation and the experience of being queer at an all-girls school. Also, quick disclaimer, there are going to be spoilers and I will be discussing homophobia, so if either of those things bother you, I'd strongly suggest clicking off or watching this video at another time. I also have not read the graphic novels, so this is only going to be reviewing the representation, not book accuracy. One of the main storylines is the character Nick Nelson discovering his bisexuality, and I'm actually so impressed about how well they did this. Nick Nelson is a popular rugby player at his school, and he is kind, friendly, and compassionate. Because of his popularity, interests, and appearance, everyone assumes he is straight. He is described by one of Charlie's friends as the straightest person she's ever seen. I think the idea of him not being a stereotypical gay or bi guy is really interesting because it shows that even people within the LGBTQ+ community make assumptions about people's sexualities based on their outward appearance. Even though the comments aren't explicitly biphobic, it still shows that people are judgmental of people who don't fit their views of what a bisexual person should look like. Nick only realizes he's bisexual when he develops a crush on Charlie and becomes confused over whether or not he is gay. He starts a journey of self-discovery by looking up "Am I gay?" quizzes on the internet. I'm not gonna lie, this part was a tad funny, and it actually has become a viral meme on the internet. And the reason why it's funny to me is partially because it's so relatable. I definitely did look up quizzes like this on the internet when I was in middle school, and when I was trying to figure out who I am, and I think that's also experience that a lot of people in the bisexual community had as well. So I think this scene was kind of funny because it called a lot of people out. It was also just so blunt, and the wording of some of the quizzes were really funny and very obviously written by straight people who work at BuzzFeed. The scene gets a bit less funny when Nick gets emotional when he discovers that homophobia is prevalent in the area where he lives, in England. As a bi person who lives in a very conservative area, this part really hit close to home. Learning that you have to make a decision between being yourself and being treated differently, or not being yourself and being treated normally, is incredibly difficult, especially when you're already experiencing the pressures of feeling like you need to fit in high school. I'm glad that they incorporated this discovery because some people aren't aware of the prevalence of homophobia because they either don't experience it or don't realize what it is. Whenever Nick is having a conversation with Charlie about their relationship, Nick says, "I'm having a proper full-on gay crisis. I've never been so confused. I just think I need some time to figure this out." I really like how Nick was able to recognize that he needed to figure himself out before he made anything public, and Charlie didn't really demonize him for it. I also think it was very mature of Nick to want to be secure in his own identity before he went public about it. Also, I liked how the show emphasized that being unsure and questioning your identity is a natural part of figuring yourself out. Although some people say that they've known about their identity their whole life, it takes some people a lot longer to figure out their identity for a variety of reasons. Of course, there's a lack of representation of bisexual people in the media, and some people aren't even aware it's a thing. Even Charlie, the main character, asks one of his friends if bi men exist. Also, since everyone perceives Nick as straight, and he expresses that he had never had a crush on a guy before Charlie, he had never seen himself as being bisexual. He becomes more sure of the fact that he is bi when he watches videos of other bi people talking about their experiences. This is also something that I related to because I never had anyone to talk to about being confused about my sexuality, and seeing other people with shared experiences was very validating and helps me discover how much I resonated with the bisexual label. One struggle in Nick's journey was the fact that he had friends who were homophobic. Nick started hanging out with Charlie as friends and invited him to things with his friend group, and he also invited Charlie to join the rugby team, which he did. His friends were pretty horrible to Charlie, both to his face and behind his back. They assumed that Charlie had a crush on them and said that Charlie was probably looking at them when they were changes, which is a pretty common accusation made about queer people in sports. His friends say some things like, "You can't just bring this gay boy into our group and expect us to immediately love him." After Nick confronts them about the comments they were making, they immediately say that none of us are being homophobic. Nick is pushed over the edge when one of them calls Charlie a slur and ends up getting in a pretty bad fight with Harry, the leader of the group. A few days later, Harry picks on one of Charlie's friends who actually disliked Nick at this point, and Nick ends up fighting Harry again to defend him. All of these events lead up to Nick eventually leaving his friend group. He was very upset with himself for not realizing how cruel his friends really were. Leaving this group and hanging out with people who were accepting and kind allowed him to explore his identity in a more safe setting and talk through his emotions and hear about the experiences of other queer people. Towards the end of the show, he is able to be open and secure in his identity and relationship. In the last episode, he tells Charlie, "But I'm definitely bisexual." It took him some time, but he finally decides to openly proclaim his identity and his relationship with Charlie. He doesn't necessarily make a big coming out statement, but instead decides to just stop hiding it. I really liked how the show did this because some big coming out scenes and posts can be a bit overdramatic and just used to create drama. It's also cool because not coming out and just being open about your identity when people ask you about it is the path that I took when I decided I didn't want to hide being bisexual anymore. So it was really interesting and validating to see someone else doing the same thing. Lastly, I can't express how happy the scene where he officially came out to his mom made me. It was not overdramatic at all. He decided to talk to his mom about his relationship with Charlie and explained what bisexuality was, and she thought it was kind of funny because she already knew. I think she said something like, "Yes, I know what bisexuality is. I wasn't born in the 18th century." Despite her joking, she is very supportive of her son, even though the conversation caught her off guard. Another thing that came up in this conversation was her telling him that it was okay if he didn't like girls. From my experience, this is something that quite a few parents say to bisexual kids because many people believe that coming out as bi is just a stepping stone to coming out as gay. Nick makes it clear that he still likes girls and his mom is completely understanding. It was a very happy scene and I'm really glad that they included it and didn't make it super sad or dramatic or anything. I'd now like to talk about the representation of being queer at an all-girls school. Two of the characters, Tara and Darcy, both identify as lesbian and are in a relationship. There are some really good and really not so good things about this storyline. Tara and Darcy first keep their relationship a bit of a secret, and then they open up to Elle, who is a transgender character who comes to an all-girls school from the all-boys school that Nick and Charlie attend, when she asks if they are girlfriends. They start being open about their relationship a few episodes later, and Tara makes it official with an Instagram post, and they received mixed reactions. Some of the reactions that they received were very realistic, while others just weren't. Some of the reactions were positive, but some of them were a bit backhanded or just straight up homophobic. One girl tells Tara when they're at band practice that, "I never would have guessed that you were gay, but it's so brave of you." From the perspective of being a student at an all-girls school, that is definitely a thing a girl would say. You can tell that she means well, but it definitely comes off the wrong way. Another interaction between the couple and another student is a conversation between them and Imogen, a straight girl who has a massive crush on Nick. There were rumors going around that Tara and Nick had some sort of relationship going on because they kissed once at a party a few years before. The rumors ended up being completely false, but Imogen asks Tara anyways because she was afraid of competition. Tara immediately denies the rumors and states that she's a lesbian. Imogen looks relieved and then says, "I'm not homophobic, I'm an ally." Now, this phrase has definitely been said to me in the past by other girls at my school, and I think it's so funny how the show displayed how awkward and strange this kind of interaction is. Darcy responds by saying, "Thank you for your service," which I think is the best possible response to someone who thinks they're amazing for being a decent human being. However, Imogen is hated on a lot on the internet, and although she is kind of annoying, she's just a teenage girl with a crush who is clueless about Nick and Charlie's relationship and is definitely not intending to make the characters uncomfortable. Some of the other students talk about Tara and Darcy behind their backs, and I'm gonna discuss some of the highlights. One girl who saw them kiss at a party said, "Some girls who are friends just do that." I don't know how to react to that, but I thought it was really funny because I've totally heard similar things before. Another conversation that was sparked by them being open about their relationship happened between two younger students at the school, and one of them stated that since the school was so large, some of the students were bound to be lesbian. Then she says to her friend, "Maybe you're a lesbian and you have no idea." And the other girl looks terrified. And in my experience at being in an all-girls school, being called lesbian is definitely one of the biggest insults that you can receive, especially when you're in middle school. Some people where I'm from see lesbians as being predatory and strange, when that is simply not the case. There's so much stigma about being queer at a single-sex school, and I think this show kind of reflected that. However, there were some things in this show that just were kind of unrealistic. In one episode, a group of girls are talking near Tara, where she is practicing before a band concert, and they look almost directly at her and say, "She's so gross and lesbians are so disgusting." While girls definitely say things like that, in my experience with frequent gossiping, no girls would ever say that within earshot of the person that they're talking about. Of course, my experience isn't necessarily the right experience, but, I kind of have a similar background to these characters, and I kind of have a knowledge of what it's like to be at an all-girls school in a conservative area. So from my experience, I just don't think this would really happen. Something like that may be more realistic in middle school, though, but older teenage girls are typically more social aware than that, so a lot of them choose to be indirect. So rumors and people bad-mouthing people who are openly queer typically in high school doesn't happen to their faces. It's a much more behind-the-back thing, especially with teenage girls. However, just because it's my experience doesn't mean it's the right experience, but in my opinion, this just wasn't exactly the best representation of being queer in an all-girls school I've ever seen. I actually haven't seen any other representation of it. However, I definitely believe that it had the potential to be more accurate. One final thing is that Tara and Darcy have displays of affection in class, which is not really realistic at all. At least at my school, there are PDA rules that prohibit kissing and stuff like that, similar to rules at co-ed schools. So there's no way that that kind of thing would really fly at my school. Okay, I have some final thoughts I'd like to share before we wrap up this conversation. First, I really like how Charlie had a teacher he could talk to about his struggles, because in my experience, having a lot of friends in the LGBTQ+ community, a lot of queer students have teachers and other adults that they come to for advice because they may not feel comfortable or safe talking to their parents about their identities. Another cool thing about this show is that it showed that straight people can like transgender people and still be straight, which is something that a lot of people don't really understand. There was so much attention given to the little details, such as the soundtrack consisting of a lot of LGBTQ+ artists, the inclusion of graphic novel effects and animations, and what is referred to as bisexual lighting and a party scene where Nick was figuring out his sexuality. I could do a whole entire episode of the concept of bisexual lighting, but I'm just gonna move on. Lastly, I'm so glad that they ended the show on a happy moment, because a lot of shows that include queer people end the show on a sad note to make it seem more realistic. And in reality, it's also realistic for queer people to have a happy ending too. Overall, despite a few minor flaws, the bisexual and women-loving women representation in the show was really great. I definitely recommend it to anyone who wants to watch a quick and wholesome show. I watched it in one day. And I'm really looking forward to watching and reviewing the next season whenever it comes out. That's all for this episode, and thank you so much for watching. Please let me know in the comments or on Instagram if you have any recommendations. Thank you so much, and see you next episode.